Unique to the Channel Islands, but most famously harvested on January, almost can only be gathered around 20 days of the year and are wrapped in a host of rules.
Guernsey or Meuse.
Guernsey or Meuse. Unique to the Channel Island, but most famously harvested on
Harvested on Guernsey or Meuse.
Guernsey.
Guernsey. Guernsey. There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the Channel on the English Channel island of Guernsey, in search of a plaster mosque. That, when French was the dominant language here until the late 19th century, was known as Origine de Marseille, stove one engaging variation doubled its Venice ear. Now known as Omer, this is the most northerly member of the Aberon family, with dozens of global cousins found in places as far apart as Senegal, Australia, Japan, and California, but only in the Channel Islands are they gathered by hand off the seashore and wrapped in a host of rules, almost are as distinctive as Guernsey itself. The island has been a British co-dependency for 800 years, despite sitting a few miles off the coast of France. Rusty parishes bearing sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like St. Sampson's and St. Peter's Film Base, with Gaelic names like Pettibot and El Anches, attracting painters like Villiers to capture their beauty. This mainland of national influence extends to an all-Ireland language, now making a comeback in schools and the media after a couple of centuries in the dorm rooms. Rooted in ancient Northern French, Grenadines is used in official ceremonies, as well as naming traditional local dishes like the apple cake gachimiran, pronounced gauche mala. While you know what to expect from apple cake, almost are harder to pin down. They are the marmite of the molasses menu, amid the long-time owner Gary Peter Perel. Peter seemed to either love them or hate them with equal intensity. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. One early colonial reference in 1673 described Omer as much bigger than an oyster. But infinitely more presents to the grotto, so that an picture would think his pilot in paradise if he might but always grammatize on such delicious ambrosia. 3 centuries later, in his 1980 work, The Book of Embarrassing Lepage, a fictional reflection of one man's life on Guernsey, Gerald Bezo Edwards wrote, "The food I like best of all foods, the food I like best of all foods is almonds. I can't say what almonds taste like. They are not like fish, fresh or raw. They are like no other. They are like no other fruit on earth." Harvesting almond is governed by strict rules and only possible during especially no tiles. The difficulty of pinning down the taste for newcomers remains. In a 2011 UK Architect Plant Society thread, one user opined that almonds have a unique flavor that is not really in most people's vocabulary to describe. They are delicious but not even remotely fishy tasting. Meanwhile, Tess Adders, an online global guide to myriad traditional foodstuffs, also had its best, describing almond in positive but rather vague terms. It's fresh, is succulent, and has a unique, mild, and slightly mint-like, but still distinctly flavor. Molluscan flavor. As a regular consumer, preview is similarly keen not to be pinned down. In the same way, you might not want to be too limiting in trying to describe a piece of music or ads. Properly cooked almonds have a texture similar to squared octopus or cuttlefish, he told me. The taste really is very distinctive and not directly comparable to anything else. If pushed, I think the nearest comparison would be razor crumbs. The fact that almond hunters obey the bidding of the moon adds magic to these monsters. The law only allows them to be graded on so-called almond tiles, designated as being only on days of a full or new moon between New Year's Day and the end of April, plus 2 days following either lunar phase. These are the days when Earth's celestial partner has the biggest effect on tidal range, something even more notable on an island with one of the highest tidal ranges in the world, at up to 10 meters from the highest to lowest tiles. A favorite way of preparing the mollusks is to threads them in local rockety cider. As the moon passed back the ocean to spring merriments, these days offer the best exposure to the rock and crevice that almost patrol to feed. Frexting like grind themselves on dedicated seaweed farms, and it is amid Guernsey snowed high rocks and exposed clumps of seaweed that Omer hunters on in search, using a variety of techniques and tools to reveal the mollusks hiding away here. There are two main methods of armoring, called turning and cracking. Pario explained. Turning involves finding a likely looking patch of loose rocks, for example, logs attached to the seabed, and searching through them carefully, where the owner can often be found hiding. Cracking involves carefully searching logs and crannies that abound in the size of gullies in the bedrock and under overhanging borders too big to turn. He continued, this relies on a keen eye for an owner in a dark and constrained space and being prepared to fill at arm's length on the rocky overhangs or in clefts. Many people have favored areas for this sort of work, with an intimate knowledge of where the best holes are to be found, often having been passed down through the generations of a family. The collection of omers is only allowed on specific days between January and April. But finding an omer doesn't mean your work is done. Thanks to the strength with which they can cling to rocks. So, tools come into play. Gatherers are often armed with a traditional omering hook, explained Pavel. This has a flattened outside edge or end to assist with pressing the armory from from its refuge. Others rely on some sort of scraper or brad, as well as limiting the van. Strict laws exist on the how of seeking armor in Guernsey. You cannot collect an armor while partially or fully submerged. A hangover from the days when people were once allowed to go diving for omers in deep water, and omers can also only leave the island with express permission. Just a small supply is exported to seafood markets in Japan, where they can fetch up to 150 pounds per kilo. Break any of the rules and you can be fined up to 5,000 pounds or face 6 months in prison. In fact, illicit omer hunting saw Guernsey police carried out the world's first recorded underwater arrest. It was 1968, and a passer-by noticed a diver bringing up omer from the sea of Castle Current, the 13th Central Harbor sighted during the Iceland capital St. Peter's port. Police were called. The constable David Alva donned square gear to dive down and apprehend Mr. Cabroning on the seabed. Providing the long arm of the law knows no limits when it comes to omers. Like many of the world's most interesting foods, people argue about the best way to eat omers. When celebrated British seafood chef Rick Stephen visited the island, he opted for the sliced fin and fresh fry approach. By contrast, another traditional Guernsey method involves splitting the omer with a wooden meringue, coating it in flour and simmering the 8 hours in gravel. The taste of this, meanwhile, lists a 17th century Asarope combining omers with pork belly, carrots, shallots, butter, and bay leaves. Omers need to be cooked either very slowly or very quickly. Anything else will result in culinary disaster, said Peril. For me, omers are best eaten as fresh as possible, with stir-frying or pan roasting. For the quick sandwich, it's hard to beat omer strips fresh fried to crispy, delicious in greasy butter, throated in local Roscotti cider is another favorite. The alcohol helps tenderize the flesh as well. I do like an old-fashioned slow cook in gravel, but usually can't wait to get stuck in. Omers can be prepared in a variety of ways, from fresh frying in butter to slow cooking in a stew. This is also a food where you really earned your culinary payoff, with Pavio admitting that armoring in the winter months is a pretty full-on experience, citing freezing sea temperatures and the likelihood of a complete stocking. Like many of the world's most interesting food, people argue about the best way to eat almost. There are other perils too. The slippery and uneven nature, 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 nature of the area you work presents dangerous from falls to potentially trapped extremities. Other dangers arise from cuts or crushed fingers, said Pavel. You also have to pay careful attention to any building swell and incoming tile, which can often seem to rush in much quicker than it went out. Despite these trivials, locals have gathered almost for centuries, though these morals actually date back at least 80 million years to when dinosaurs wandered the zone. It isn't known whether the dinosaurs had a taste for Omer, but they have often provided an important source of subsistence for Guernsey's hungry humans in more recent times. Song gathering was a way to um, supplement food supplies when times were hard. Omers were often pickled to preserve them, said Pavio. They also provided food during the dark years of the Iceland occupation by German force from 1940 to 45, when other survival dishes included potato pear pie. Some years have seen legendary Omer harvest. 20,000 were reputedly caught on a single day at Perry Bay in 1841, while during one no-till in 1965, 400-strong gatherers harvested nearly 31,000 omers. 2 years later, an estimated 200,000 omers were gathered over the entire season. Considered a quintessential delicacy by locals, omers have been traditionally collected on the island for centuries. Unsurprisingly, such vast harvests hit omer numbers. Guernsey imposed the first regulations to limit the harvest as far back as 1876, while omer season was cancelled for 3 years in a row from 1974 to 1976. Though the population remains far below past historical levels, there are now conservation efforts like Project Omer, which began in 2018 under the auspices of the Société Française, led by marine biologist Noreen Patton. Volunteers carried out surveys at no-till, tagging omers they found with a coat yellow labeled. Tagging omers they found with a coated yellow label fixed to the shelf with water activated glue. The Omer tagging project has really captured people's imagination. Guernsey people love to talk about omers, said Patton. It's great that so many people are interested, and not just in eating them. I hope we can engage more people. In learning about our natural environment. There is always a buzz around the island when Omer season is approaching, and I love watching the gatherers on the beaches at no tide. At the windy paddle from the island's tourist board. The long-standing debate among islanders on how best to prepare and eat the omers is part of Guernsey's culture. The UK seafood that could send you to jail. There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the shore Nile on the English Channel Island of Guernsey.
English Channel Island of Guernsey in search of a prized mollusk that.
Prized mollusk. English Channel Island.
English Channel Island of Guernsey in search of a prized mollusk that. English Channel island of Guernsey in search of a prized mollusk that.
There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the shoreline on the English Channel island of Guernsey in search of a prized mollusk. English Channel island of Guernsey, shoreline,
Shoreline.
shoreline, shoreline, shoreline. There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the shoreline on the English Channel island of Guernsey in search of a prized mollusk. Prized mollusk. Prized mollusk.
Prized mollusk.
Prized mollusk. Prized. 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 Prized mollusk. When French was the dominant language here until the late 19th century, was known as
Ariel de Mer, Seer.
was known as already the mare sea ear, though one engaging variation doubled its Venus ear.
Dominant.
Dominant. When French was the dominant language here until the late 19th century, was known as Origine de Mer sea ear, though one engaging variation dubbed its Venus ear.
Dubbed it Venus ear.
Venus ear.
Dubbed it Venus ear.
Dubbed it Venus ear. Dubbed it.
Dubbed.
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 Dubbed. Dubbed it Venus ear. There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the shoreline on the English Channel island of Guernsey in search of a prized monostat. When French was the dominant language here until the late 19th century, was known as already demure sea year. Though one engaging variation doubted it Venus year, now known as Omer. This is the most northerly member of the
most northerly member of the abalone family, with dozens of global cousins found in places as far apart as Senegal. Most northerly member of the abalone family, with dozens of global cousins found in places as far apart as Senegal. Abalone. Abalone.
Abalone.
abalone, abalone, abalone. Most lovely member of the abalone family with dozens of global cousins. Cousins found in place as far apart as Senegal.
Senegal.
Senegal. Now known as Omer, this is the most lovely member of the abalone family. Abalone, abalone, abalone,
Abalone.
abalone,
Abalone.
abalone, abalone. Now known as Omer, this is the most lovely member of the abalone family with dozens of global cousins found in places as far apart as Senegal, Australia, Japan, and California, but only in the Channel Islands.
Channel Islands.
Channel Islands are they gathered by hand off the season and wrapped in the hulls of wools. Omers are as distinctive as Guernsey itself. Almost are as distinctive as Guernsey itself. The island has been a British Crown dependency for 800 years, despite sitting a few miles off the coast of France.
Coast.
The coast of France. Rustic parish bearing
Rustic parishes, bearing sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like St. Sampson's and St. Peter's Frame bays with Gallic names like Pettibot and Longcress, attracting painters like Renoir to capture their beauty.
rusty parishes bearing sturdy rustic parishes.
Rustic.
Rustic parishes.
Parishes.
Parishes. Parishes. Rustic parishes. bearing sturdy, bearing sturdy, bearing sturdy, rustic parishes, bearing sturdy, Anglo-Saxon names like St. Simpson's and St. Peter's film based, with Gaelic names. Gaelic,
Gaelic,
Gaelic, Gaelic names like Pettibone and
Petty,
Pettibone and attracting painters like Vanolier.
rustic parishes bearing sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like St. Sampson's and St. Peter's Frame bays with Gaelic names like Pettibot and Longcress, attracting painters like Renoir to capture their beauty.
Renoir.
To capture their beauty. Almost are as distinctive as Guernsey itself. The island has been a British crown dependency for 800 years, despite sitting a few miles off the coast of France. Rustic parishes bearing sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like St. Sampson's and St. Peter's Film base, with Gaelic names like Pettibroad and Arches, attracting painters like Renoir to capture their beauty. This meaning of the national influence extends to an all-Ireland language now making a comeback in schools and the media after a couple of centuries in the dum-dums.
Mélange. Mélange.
Melange. Melange. Conceal.
The doldrums. The doldrums.
The doldrums. In the doldrums. 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 In the doldrums. Unsuccessful or showing no activity or development. In the doldrums. In the doldrums. Doldrums. In the doldrums. Doldrums.
Doldrums, doldrums,
Doldrums. 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 Doldrums.
The doldrums.
The doldrums.
Doldrums. Doldrums. Doldrums. In the doldrums. In the doldrums. In the doldrums means unsuccessful or showing no activity or development. Sad and with no energy or enthusiasm. Doldrummed. Doldrummed. In the doldrums. Omer are as distinctive as Guernsey itself. The island has been a British Crown dependency for 800 years, despite sitting a few miles off the coast of France. Rustic parishes bearing sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like St. Sampson's and St. Peter's Frame Bays, with Gaelic names like Pettibot and lodges. Pendercrest, attracting painters like Vernon to capture their beauty. This melange of national influence extends to an old Iron language now making a comeback in schools and the media after a couple of centuries in the doldrums. This melange of national influence extends to an old Iron language now making a comeback in schools and the media after a couple of centuries in the doldrums.
Mélange.
Wrote in ancient Norman French. Guernsey. Guernese is used in official ceremonies, as well as naming traditional local dishes like the apple cake, gauchemelle.
Guernsey rice is used in official ceremonies, as well as naming traditional local dishes like the apple cake gâche mêlée, pronounced gauche mêlée.
Gauchemelle, as well as naming traditional locals.
Guernese.
Guernsey as allies is used in official ceremonies as well as naming traditional local dishes like the apple cake, gauchemelle. While you know what to expect from apple cake, almost are harder to pin down.
Almost are harder to pin down.
While you know what to expect from apple cake, almost are harder to pin down. They are the marmite of the Morris menu.
They're the marmite of the mollusk menu. Marmite.
They are the marmite of the mollusk menu.
They're the marmite of the mollusk menu.
While you know what to expect from apple cake, almost are harder to pin down. They are the marmite of the mollusk menu. Admit long-time Omer gatherer Peter Pavio.
Peter Perio.
Peter Perio. Peter seemed to either love them or hate them with equal intensity. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. Intensity is, well, pretty intense. One early
Culinary.
connected with cooking or kitchens.
Culinary.
Culinary
reference.
An early culinary reference in 1673 described an omer as much bigger than an oyster. Oyster. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. One early culinary reference. Culinary reference. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. One early culinary reference. Oyster. Culinary. Oyster, but infinitely. Very or very much. Infinitely. But infinitely more presence to the gusto. Gusto. Great energy, enthusiasm, and enjoyment that is experienced by someone taking part in an activity, especially a performance. Gusto. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. One early culinary reference. Culinary reference. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. One early culinary reference in 1673 described omer as much bigger than an oyster, but infinitely more presence to the gusto. But infinitely more presence to the gusto, so that the an
Epicure would think his palate
epicure, epicure,
epicure,
epicure, a person who takes particular pleasure in fine food and drink. Epicure, epicure would thank his palate, palate, palate. So that an epicure would thank his palate in paradise if he might but always gormandize on such
gourmandize on such delicious ambrosia.
gormandize,
Ambrosia, ambrosia, ambrosia,
ambrosia, gormandized, gormandized. But infinitely more present to the gusto, so that an epicure would thank his palate in paradise if he might, but always gormandize on such delicious ambrosia. 3 centuries later, in his 1981 work, The Book of Ambrosia Lepage, a fictional reflection of one man's life on Guernsey.
A fictional reflection of one man's life on Guernsey.
Fictional. Relating to fiction invented for the purpose of friction. Fictional. Friction. Frictional.
Fictional.
Imaginary. Fictional. Imaginary. Fictional. 3 centuries later, in his 1981 work The Book of Ambrosia Lepage, a fictional reflection of one man's life on Guernsey, Dranray Basil Arras wrote, "The food alike best of all fruits is almost. The food I like best of all fruits is almost. The food I like best of all fruits is almost. I can't say what almost tastes like. They are not like fresh or flour. They are like no other fruit on earth. They are like no other fruit on earth."
Flesh or fowl.
Fresh or foul, fresh or foul, fresh, 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 fresh or foul. They are not like fresh or foul. They are like no other food on earth. The difficulty of pinning down the taste of newcomers remains. In a 2011 UK Aquatic Plant Society thread, one user opined that almonds have a unique flavor that is not really in most people's vocabulary to describe. They are delicious, but not even remotely fishy tasting. Meanwhile, taste ardens.
Taste atlas.
Taste Atlas, an online global guide to
myriad traditional foodstuffs. Foodstuffs.
foodstuffs.
Myriad.
Myriad. Myriad. Myriad. Myriad. Myriad.
Myriad.
Myriad. Myriad. A very large number of something. Myriad. A myriad of choice. Myriad. 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 Meanwhile, taste Alice. 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 Alice.
Atlas.
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 Atlas. A book containing maps. Atlas. 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 Meanwhile, taste Atlas. Take Atlas. Or an online global guide to myriad. To myriad.
Myriad.
Myriad, 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 myriad. Meanwhile, Taste Atlas, an online global guide to myriad traditional foodstuffs. An online global guide to myriad traditional foodstuffs also hashed its best. Describing Omer in positive but rather weak terms. It is fresh. They are not like fresh or foul. Fresh. It's fresh, is succulent, and has a unique, mild, and slightly meat-like, but still distinctively monoton flavor.
Also hedged its bets, describing Orma in positive but rather vague terms. Its flesh is succulent and has a unique, mild, and slightly meat-like, but still distinctively molluscan flavor. Also hedged its bets.
Hashed its best. Hedge its best. Beats the odds. Hedged its best. Hedge its best. Describing also hedge its best. Describing Omer in positive but rather weak terms. Vague, also but rather vague terms. Is fresh, is succulent. succulent， succulent 係多用。succulent is fresh, is succulent, and has a unique, mild and slightly mint-like, but still distinctively molluscan flavor. Unique to the Channel Islands, but most famously harvested on Guernsey, almonds can only be gathered around 20 days of the year and are wrapped in a host of rules. There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the shoreline on England's Channel Island of Guernsey in search of a prized monarch's death. There are only unique to the Channel Islands, but most famously harvested on Guernsey. Unique to the Channel Islands. Unique to the Channel Islands. Unique to the Channel Islands, but most famously harvested on Guernsey. Almonds can only be gathered around 20 days of the year and are wrapped in a host of rules. There are only around 20 days a year when the law allows you to go down to the shoreline on the English Channel Island of Guernsey in search of a prized monarch's death. When French was the dominant language here until the late 19th century, was known as Henri de Mer, sea ear, though one engaging variation dubbed its Venus ear. Now known as Omer, this is the most northerly member of the abalone family. This is the most northerly member of the abalone family, with dozens of global cousins found in places as far apart as Senegal, Australia, Japan, and California, but only in the Channel Islands are they gathered by hand of the season and wrapped in a host of rules. Almonds are as distinctive as Guernsey itself. The island has been a British Crown dependency for 800 years, despite sitting a few miles off the coast of France. Rustic parishes bearing sturdy Anglo-Saxon names like St. Sampson's and St. Peter's swim bays with Gaelic names like Pettibot and Andrews, attracting painters like Wainwright to capture their beauty. This marriage of national influence extends to an all-Ireland language, now making a comeback in schools and media after a couple of centuries in the doldrums. Doldrums. Rooted in ancient Norman French, Gassericaceus is used in official ceremonies as well as naming traditional local dishes like the apple cake gauchemele. While you know what to expect from apple cake, almonds are harder to pin down. They are the Marmite of the Morris menu, Amid the long-time almond-gatherer Peter Peril, people seem to either love them or hate them with equal intensity. People seem to either love them or hate them with equal intensity. For those who love them, the intensity is, well, pretty intense. The only culinary on early culinary reference culinary on early culinary reference in 1673 described the omer as much bigger than an oyster. On early culinary reference in 1673 described the omer as much bigger than an oyster, but infinitely more present to the gusto, so that an epicure would think his palate in paradise if he might, but always gourmandize on such delicious ambrosia. 3 centuries later, in his 1981 work, The Book of Ambroise Lepage, a fictional reflection of one man's life on Guernsey. A fractional reflection of one man's life on Guernsey. The food I like best of all foods is omers. I can't say what omers taste like. They are not like fish, flesh, or fowl. They are like no other food on earth. The difficulty of pinning down the taste of newcomers remains. In the 2011 UK Architect Plant Society thread, one user opined that omers have a unique flavor that is not really in most people's vocabulary to describe. They are delicious but not even remotely fishy tasting. Meanwhile, Taste Atlas, on an online global guide to myriad traditional foodstuff. Myriad. An online global guide to myriad traditional foodstuff. Myriad traditional foodstuffs. Also hedge its best, describing Oma in positive but rather vague terms. It's fresh, is succulent, and has a unique, mild, and slightly meat-like, but still distinctively molluscan flavor. Molluscan flavor.